So welcome everyone. I'm Ann McFarland, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today. We've all been faced with lots of important issues right now facing our society, and we want to make a difference, and how can we do it? So this is Better Meetings, Advance Social Justice. The material contained in this presentation is based on the principles and practices of parliamentary procedure. Nothing in this presentation constitutes legal advice. So why are we here? Well, my goal is to equip you to run effective meetings to advance social justice in our society. We all have a lot of challenges right now, and we need to use our energies in the best way. As our starter, I'm thrilled to announce that Dr. Laura Morgan is going to tell us about how she became a professional registered parliamentarian.
Thank you, Ann. Good evening, everyone. Like Ann said, my name is Dr. Laura Morgan. I live in Chicago, here with my husband and my son, as you can see from my background. Ann asked that I share my story with you on why I became a professional parliamentarian. And I'm happy to do so, and very pleased to be the guest of Jurassic Parliament this evening. Believe it or not, my story and my journey to becoming a professional parliamentarian really started with a knock on my door early one morning. When I was awakened by one of my neighbors feverishly knocking on my door, she had tears in her eyes when she said, Mrs. Morgan, my son is dead. They killed him. They shot him 5 times right under the police camera, 1 block from our homes. I said, which son? And she told me, but I didn't recognize the name. She said he was only 23 years old. My thoughts immediately went to my own 23-year-old son, who was sleeping peacefully upstairs at the time. I didn't want to think about going to the morgue to identify my own son's body or seeing him blood splattered on the streets. I couldn't help but to empathize with her, and believe it or not, with the killer's mother as well. I knew 2 mothers were suffering that morning. Then I thought, how did we get to this point in our community where kids were killing kids, 1 block from our homes? How did my community, where I had raised my own son, become a killing field with the nickname Beirut? I was later to learn. And how do we work to stop it? First, I decided I had to start with myself. I could only answer for myself. Maybe if I could look within and discover what I did or didn't do that may have inadvertently caused the death of my neighbor's son, then maybe this personal reflection could really translate into a reflection of the community. Looking within, I realized that my neighbor's son was dead, and I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he looked like. They had been my neighbors for about 5 years or more. I was on speaking terms with the mother, but I really didn't know her. When I woke up that morning, I realized that not only didn't I know this family, I really didn't know my community. It had changed before my very eyes, or had it. Maybe the problems were there all along, and I had just been too busy with my job and raising my family to notice. Above all, I really didn't know, other than voting in elections, what my job as a citizen was I didn't know the job description of a good citizen. My husband and I thought we had it all figured out. We knew the neighborhood was not the best and the schools were overcrowded and reading and math scores were abysmal. No problem. We sent our son to a parochial or a private school and moved as soon as possible. We had white flight and black flight. Middle class moved out of the neighborhood. But we never did. Life got in the way. The first job of any parent is to make sure their children grow up in a healthy community. So what to do next? All this reflection was taking place around the same time our new president was elected, Barack Obama. On January 19, 2009, he asked all of us to volunteer for a day. So I decided to look for an agency or organization my family could spend the day volunteering with in my community. When I checked the website, there was not one organization listed from my community. I cried, actually cried. First, because it seemed nobody cared about the children in my community. Secondly, because I realized I had never volunteered in my own community before. I started to get involved in organizations in my community. My goal was not to send more young people to prison, but to make sure they received a quality education, support, and love. So I looked for organizations with this intent. Children should not have to do bad before we notice them. I was full steam ahead with the motto, it takes a village. However, I got sidetracked time and time again when I noticed that many of the organizations were getting bogged down with Robert's Rules of Order and very seldom accomplished their goals. Had poor leadership, dysfunction was evident, and meetings went on and on. I decided I needed to know more about Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedures. I did some research and I was delightfully surprised that you could become a registered parliamentarian and then a professional registered parliamentarian. I started that journey one step at a time, and now I am a professional registered parliamentarian and getting ready to offer my services to the community and the world, really. I believe professional parliamentarians should speak out, especially now with the current climate in our country and with protests breaking out all over the world and diverse groups fighting against racial and social injustices and police reform. I may be naive, but I really believe that while the adrenaline is flooding and with the help of a professional parliamentarian, these newly formed organizations can progress and not dissolve, even when the passion dies down. To my fellow parliamentarians, I think it is time our professional organizations, NAP and AIP, sit down with their Black and brown parliamentarians to figure out how these organizations can help better serve our communities. All of you on this webinar will have the capacity to serve your communities better by using the principles that will be talked about today. Please feel free to share them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Your
Thank you.
story is very touching, and it's wonderful to hear about the journey that you have taken and your message. And I know that everybody on the call appreciates it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I think Laura's message is one of the reasons why you're all here. We're looking at what's going on in our country, and we're saying, how do we achieve the goal? We all agree on the goal, but what methods can we use? So that's what we're going to be talking about today in terms of parliamentary procedure. First thing I want to talk about today is consensus. We saw Laura's story and how passionate she is, and all of us must be when we see some of the terrible things, the murder of George Floyd and others that have happened recently. And it's causing us all to think, what can I do? And many organizations use a consensus method for their decision making, or if you ask them, they'll say that's consensus. Well, we have found in Jurassic Parliament that there are dangers to consensus decision making. It's not always the best way to determine your way forward. I'm not going to go into all those today, but we have this paper, Dangers of Consensus Decision Making, which I'm going to send to you after the session along with the slides so you can see our argument. We believe that structure is necessary, that structure creates a container for emotion so that our feelings don't overwhelm the discussion. So in order to think about an alternative to consensus, I'd like to talk about the principles that we're sharing today from parliamentary procedure. And I'm going to begin talking about the authority and the role of the chair and the members. I know that many of you are familiar with this idea, but it bears repeating. So we distinguish in Jurassic Parliament between two different types of organizations. One is shaped like a triangle or a pyramid. And at the top, you've got the boss. The boss is in charge. And the boss directs people, hires them, directs them, and if they do their work badly, fires them. So this is called an accountability hierarchy. It's a hierarchy because there are levels, and each level is responsible to or accountable to the level above. And this is an excellent structure for getting things done. Our corporations are all like this. Every hospital has a superintendent, every school has a principal, every army has a general. It's very widespread, and we often think of it as the kind of default setting. But in fact, there's a whole nother type of association, and that's called a voluntary association. In a voluntary association, a group of people come together to achieve a common purpose, and they set up some guidelines for themselves, and they choose a leader. But the leader is a peer. The leader is an equal on the same standing as everybody else. And all our city councils, nonprofit boards, social justice groups, they are all voluntary associations. They're very, very different from an accountability hierarchy. And one of the biggest problems we have in this country, in my view, is that our image of the leader as the captain of industry is so developed that as soon as someone becomes the chair, they start thinking they're the boss, and other people treat them as if they were the boss, and that's just not true. It's not the case. It's a different role. So here are 3 quick points. Each member has an equal right in such a gathering to speak and to try to persuade others to accept their view. During meetings, the chair controls the process so the group can make the decisions. And during meetings, the chair is the servant of the group, and the group is the final authority. So this is the first of the 4 fundamental guidelines we're going to cover today. The chair is the servant of the group, and the group is the final authority. Now, you may have both types of structure. You may have a nonprofit board forming a voluntary association and an executive director and staff who form an accountability hierarchy. So they run on different principles. When you're serving on a board, it's okay to disagree. The fact that people have different opinions is a strength. It's a good thing. But sometimes we tend to identify with our own position, and when we're defeated, we sometimes take it personally. And that is a mistake. It's a fundamental principle of democracy that the decision of the majority voting at a properly called meeting is the decision of the body as a whole. The minority must make it their decision as well. It's a terrible system, but I love Winston Churchill's quote. Winston Churchill said, "Democracy is the worst system of government in all the world, with the exception of those others that have been tried from time to time." So this is our system, and it's a system that we should be following, in my belief, in our social justice groups. The bottom line is, in a democracy, how we decide things is more important than what we decide. So courtesy and respect, no surprises, no end runs are essential for the system to work. And the reason is the ballot box is sacred because the alternative is blood. Elias Canetti said this during the Second World War, and you can see that, it's really true. All over the world, we see the struggle between the forces of justice and the forces of strength and power and blood. So let's talk now about meeting discussion. Here is another key principle from Robert's Rules. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. It's pretty easy to say. It seems pretty obvious, but in fact, we don't always observe it in our meetings. And one key point here is that discussion in board and committee meetings is not a conversation. It has its own rules, which are different from the way we conduct conversations. So here's the second of our fundamental guidelines. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. And to ensure this, no one may speak a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. Now, this is probably the most neglected rule in all of Robert's Rules, but I'm going to give it to you in red because it's so important. No one may speak a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. This is absolutely a transformative rule. You can avoid having board meetings like hockey games if you follow this rule, but we don't tend to follow it. Boards tend to discuss their affairs in conversational mode. In conversations, dominant people tend to dominate and agreeable people tend to let them. So you must have a structure to make sure that everyone has an equal chance to speak. This is both fair and efficient. So here are some of the tips that can make you do this. The first one is members seek recognition before speaking. You seek recognition before speaking. You follow the rule, no one can speak a second time. You don't have sidebar conversations or whispering, and absolutely no interrupting. So let's unpack these. The chair controls who speaks when. You raise your hand and you wait to speak until the chair calls your name, nods at you, or gives some other sign that you have permission to speak. And don't do this. I'd like to say raising your hand as you speak. That's not the way the system works. Another point is no interrupting. When a member has the floor, they have the right to speak until they've completed their comments. Interrupting is absolutely forbidden. Members may not interrupt each other, and the chair may not interrupt members. Now, there is an exception, a point of order when it's essential, which we'll mention again in a minute. We strongly recommend having a policy of no electronic devices during the meeting. I know this is pretty radical, but phone snubbing, where you're looking at your phone instead of your colleagues, is rude to others, and it weakens the body's cohesion and ability to work well together. When members are distracted, they're not attending to the work of the body, which wastes everyone's time. And you certainly don't want to have any tweeting or posting on social media during meetings. Let the meeting be itself. Now, Jurassic Parliament recognized that sometimes there's benefit in the conversational style or informal discussion. It can provide a sparky flow of ideas that can be beneficial. We recommend that you keep the conversational style for study sessions or explorations and follow these guidelines for your ordinary discussions. Now, the round robin is a great method. The chair goes around the table asking each person in turn for their opinion. People can pass and then speak at the end. If you do that, you want to have a pencil in hand to jot down your questions for when your time comes. And if you're using this, the chair must wait their turn also. They don't get to answer each person back. So a speaking chart is a great tool for the round robin. And here's an example of one. You just put people's names down one side and columns on the other and check them off as they speak. It's particularly useful for online meetings. There's also another further technique called the exploratory round robin. This is different. Everyone agrees not to offer amendments or other motions during the first round. The first round becomes an information gathering step, and the secretary notes comments or questions on a whiteboard. This gives you the entire picture of the members' views before discussion begins. We developed this for Seattle Children's Research Institute, and it proved very effective. Here's your discussion sheet. You put down the positives, the negatives, and the questions. You don't worry about names. It's not attributing who, it's just getting it all out there so that you know what everybody thinks. So in your packet of resources materials, I'm going to include this description of how to do it. Make better decisions using the exploratory round robin. We also have a guideline called Essential Guidelines for Small Casual Groups. If you don't want to be big and formal, this is a dozen little points that will enable you to run effective and fair meetings. And all of these can be shared and distributed freely. Now let's talk about courtesy and respect. This is the third of our fundamental guidelines. Courtesy and respect are essential. It's a basic principle of parliamentary procedure that debate must be germane, that's a jargon word meaning relevant, to the topic at hand. Certain kinds of remarks are inappropriate because they're not relevant. So courtesy and respect are required at all times. Now here's a list of 6 of them. I'm just going to quickly run down them. So you can't make personal remarks about other people. You can't say, you're just saying that because you're a social worker. Those things are not relevant. The only exception would be conflict of interest. And of course, you'll have your own conflict of interest policy. You can't make discourteous remarks, insulting language, or attacks. You can't use inflammatory language, language that gets people's blood pressure up. You can't criticize, the technical word is impugn. You can't impugn another member's motives. I think you're just saying that because you want to get elected mayor next year. One that few people know is that you can't criticize past actions of the group, with 2 exceptions. If the subject is under discussion by the whole group or a member is about to propose a change, that's okay. And finally, the big umbrella, you can't make remarks that are not germane to the discussion. So we have, again, a paper on this, Inappropriate Remarks on Nonprofit Boards, that we'll be sending to you that goes into more detail. And I particularly want to note the prohibition against addressing motives. This is one of the best tools to advance your goals. Don't let anybody in your group start talking about the motives of other members of the group. It's fine to mention your own motives. I'm only doing this for the good of us all. And you can also talk about the motives of non-members. You know, I think they want to do such and so. That's fine, but not the motives of others. Eliminating that from your discussion makes things much, much cleaner and keeps us focused on the issues rather than on personalities. Now, if any question arises as to whether a remark is appropriate or not, the chair rules, subject to appeal. The chair can also turn immediately to the board to ask the members to decide. Ultimately, it's the board's call. It's the board's decision about what's appropriate and what's not. Now, I do want to mention that we're speaking here about discussion among members within meetings. If you're a local government, these prohibitions do not apply to the public when they're giving public comment. And we have lots on our website about that. Now, if a member breaks the rules and says, anybody who would say that is full of baloney, then you should make a point of order. We're not going to explain that particular parliamentary maneuver right now because we're focused on the non-technical side of running meetings to advance social justice, but I'm including this paper for you that explains how it works. We believe in Jurassic Parliament that point of order and appeal are the absolute heart of democracy. They are just critical to having the group be the final authority. I want to mention, speaking of rules, that rules are proxies. What do I mean by that? If we had an ideal society, we would have a rule that no one could vote until they had demonstrated that they were a mature, well-educated thinker, well-informed about all social issues. We can't enforce a rule like that, so instead we have the rule that says you can vote when you're 18. That rule, vote when you're 18, is a proxy for the value of maturity. It stands for maturity. It's not the same thing as maturity. So rules are proxies for values. They are necessary, but they're limited. Rules are based on the past. They're always approximate. You want to look to the value that underlies the rule. This is not original with me. Dov Seidman presented me with these ideas, but I think they're very important. So what is the key value in Robert's rules? It's respect. Respect is just essential here. You have to treat your colleagues with respect. It's the only way you can advance your cause. And if you don't respect them, which I've had people say to me, if you don't respect them, act as if you did. Act as if you did. Now we're going to come to our next guideline, one thing at a time. So Robert's Rules is very linear, and the chair and the members must insist on this because our human brains are not linear and we tend to go wandering all over the landscape. So we strongly suggest that you prepare an agenda for your meetings and that it be timed. Add suggested times for each agenda. You don't want to be bound by them, absolutely, but they give you a sense of how long things will take. And be realistic. In my time, I've prepared an agenda that would have taken 7 hours for a 2-hour meeting. And of course, it didn't go well at all. Stick to your agenda. Don't allow discussion to slide off into side topics not immediately relevant to the discussion. And we have lots more on agendas on the website. We also have this paper, Time Limits Create Productive Meetings, talking about time limits. That's one of the biggest issues I hear about social justice groups is that everybody's so passionate and so averse to structure that the meetings go on forever. You don't want to have that happen. Now I'd like to talk about your role as a leader. And I have a great quote here from my friend and colleague, David Rumsey. He was president of the American Translators Association, a job I also had the honor to hold. And he says, the job is one of ego management, and the most important ego to manage is your own. David, by the way, is writing a book called Buddha in the Boardroom, and you can sign up for his email newsletter at this email address, boardroombuddha.net. I'm really looking forward to it. It takes the Eightfold Path of Buddha and applies it to board meetings. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting. So in order to put what I'm suggesting into practice, you've got to have 3 things. You as the leader must have knowledge of how this system works. You have to have buy-in from your board. You have to majority on your board who are in favor of civility and this system. And you have to have the personal moxie, the chutzpah, the energy and the drive to put it all into practice. It's not easy. It's much easier to let things drift. So I'm calling on you, all of you who wrote yes in the chat, to be ready and able to muscle up and apply these things. You as chair control who speaks when. You serve as a benevolent dictator, enforcing the rules the group has chosen. Of course, don't try to do it single-handedly. You want to make sure the group buys in first. Individual members must seek recognition before speaking. So if someone speaks up without being recognized, you stop them. If someone speaks out of turn, you interrupt them. If someone makes insulting remarks, you cut them off. How many of you feel that you could do that? If you feel that you could do that, please write yes into the chat. Let's see how many of our folks who are here are willing and able to make those comments. Good, I love it. I'm seeing Vince and Azella and Carolyn, Aaron, Ruth has done it, Susan. Nice to see mayors and leaders taking those. Yes, thank you so much. So that's just critical. And if you can't do it, I think, it's really hard to carry out your task. So the phrase that I love is called generous authority. It's a generous authority. You're exercising authority on behalf of the group. You want to be businesslike and focused and keep things moving, but show humanity and humor when appropriate. And that phrase comes from Priya Parker and her wonderful book, The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters. If you haven't read Priya's book, I strongly recommend it to you. It's just fabulous. She takes everything from a christening party to a 3-day convention and gives you new and fresh ways of looking at it. I see that Vince from OSBA says he loves it. Great, Vince, wonderful. The other concept that I think is really helpful here is strength versus warmth. And this comes from the book Compelling People, The Hidden Qualities That Make Us Influential. John Neffinger and Matthew Kohut point out that when we meet someone, we look for two qualities. One is strength. How capable are you? Can you get stuff done in the world? And by extension, can you get what I want done? The other is warmth. How much do you care about other people? And by extension, how much do you care about me? So the challenge is that to a certain extent, the two qualities are in a hydraulic relationship. And the stronger you appear, the colder you appear. And the warmer you appear, the weaker you appear. So you have to convey both. A good leader has to convey both. And they give some wonderful guidance in this book about how to develop and exhibit both those qualities in your leadership role. Now, how should you control that meeting? Especially since control often seems anathema when we're talking justice, but it isn't. We recommend the crouching tiger method. You see this Sumatran beauty. She's laid perfectly at ease on the rock, but the minute that something happens, she's going to pounce. Don't go halfway through the meeting and then try to impose control. Talk with people at the beginning, get their buy-in, and then be prepared to speak up when necessary. Robert has a wonderful phrase, the chair should never get excited. The chair should never get excited. So we want to avoid this kind of situation, which some of you recognize, I'm sure. It's a real live photo. It's not something that was posed, and that's not what we want at our meetings. So controlling the meeting in a positive way is both an art and a skill. It's like learning a foreign language. It's a performance art. And as you become more experienced, your ability grows. So the chair must control the discussion, recognize members, interrupt a member who breaks the rules, be fair at all times, and remain calm. The chair must not participate too much in the debate, try to control the content of the debate, try to make people vote the chair's way, get all emotional, or interrupt the speaker because he knows more than the speaker about the subject. The kind of central paradox is that when you're chairing that meeting, you're the most important person in the room and the least important. You must be strict on process, a benevolent dictator, but you as chair are not responsible for the decision that the group makes. And to me, this was wonderfully freeing when I was president of the American Translators Association and presiding at board meetings. It wasn't my job to make everybody think the way I did. It was my job to conduct a fair process so that the group could make the decision. The chair is the servant of the group, and the group is the final authority. Finally, I want to talk about personal relationships. I love Jerry Harvey. He's a management guru who wrote The Trip to Abilene. And he wrote, when I speak of leadership, I'm describing what Elliot Jakes and Steve Clement call that process in which one person sets the direction, purpose or direction for one or more others and gets them to move along with him or her and with each other in that direction with competence and full commitment. This definition of leadership requires that you, the leader, be emotionally bonded, attached, connected, or linked with those whom you lead. It also requires that those whom you lead be emotionally bonded, attached, connected, or linked with you and one another. That's what shared purpose and commitment are all about. So I really like this definition, and I think it makes the important point. It makes the important point that emotion is essential to the way that we're going to run our meetings and advance our cause. Don't fear it, but do your best to have it run in the best channels. So I want to mention that another excellent source is Craig Freshley, who writes Good Group Decisions. And I'm including in your little packet the definition of his little paper on coalition membership. Are any of you involved in coalitions? Can you write in the chat if that's a part of your job, a part of your functioning, to be in a coalition? Because it certainly presents special challenges. So I really liked what Craig had to say about this, and I don't see it often. It's not something I see about how to function in good coalitions. Thank you for everybody who's mentioning that. So I said we were here to equip you to run effective meetings to advance social justice in our society. So now I get to ask, do you feel better equipped? Let me know. Let us know in the chat. What are your feelings about all this, about these suggestions? Grace says yes. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. And Abby, we can get so caught up in the emotion of the topic that we don't get anything accomplished. No one will listen to you if you're unkind or unprofessional. Very nice comment there, Matt. And Mara Lee, good inspiration from Dr. Laura. So please do feel free to be in touch. You know that Jurassic Parliament is always happy to connect with you. Laura, I know we didn't plan this in the schedule, but I think what you said was so important. Would you like to put your video on and just say a couple words in farewell?
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group. These are really trying times now, and we're all confused as to what's going on. So to hear your comments today and the helpful words has really helped me as a parliamentarian. And I am so looking forward to working with groups in my community to help them help the children. We really want our children to be able to grow up in a healthy community. That's all we want as parents. And we also want to live in healthy communities. As seniors, we want to live in healthy communities. So I'm looking forward to sharing my parliamentary experience with the members of my community, and hopefully we will grow, and the next time I'll be able to report that. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate being a guest of Jurassic Parliament.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Wonderful to have you, Laura. So, and thank you for your great comments. So I'm just delighted that you all were here and that we had the chance to hear Laura. And I want to say in closing, I get to go back to my share here. There we go. You know, when we look at the challenges that we face, sometimes it's pretty difficult. So I believe that if we can keep these 4 fundamental guidelines in mind, as Richard wrote, simple, respect, you know, we will do much better. And I'm giving you those guidelines in a handout. And I want to quote Rabbi Tarfon. The student said to the rabbi, "What am I going to do, Rabbi? The Torah is so great and my life is so short. And I study and study and I only make a tiny bit of progress." And the rabbi replied, "It is not yours to finish this task, but you are not free to desist from it." So I think that's got to be our motto. It is not ours to finish the task. We are not going to achieve everything that we wish for in our lifetime, but we are not free to desist from it. So those are my closing words. Thank you so much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at another Jurassic Parliament event.